Tell me how you end up becoming the guy as an author and a guy who writes books and does a bit of research. And then you, over a bunch of years, obviously, it doesn't happen overnight, but you move to being a guy that the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cleveland Indians and a bunch of other groups bring in to say, how do we make a better culture? Like, how did that journey start for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess it started by being in the middle of three brothers and having to compete with them a lot. We were Irish triplets, but all of us about less than a year apart. And so when you're competing for, well, in our case, sort of food, love, space, and other essentials, you end up thinking about the edge that you can get. I studied pre-med in college, majored in English as well, and kind of almost went to medical school, made this turn into journalism. So I brought kind of a scientific curiosity about X-raying performance. Like, what is that made of? It looks like magic when you see someone do something incredible, but what's underneath? It's not really magic, right? There's something there. What is that thing? And that question led me into journalism is a license to be curious. And so you can call up. It's the cool thing is you can call up people like you and say, hey, you seem really good at what you do. Tell me more about that. And then you can go visit them and you can watch them and you can capture what happens on paper. And that's sort of what I ended up doing, this weird career where I would sort of travel around the world looking for great performers and then going to them and trying to see what they do and then connect the dots scientifically to what's really going on.
And it was that connecting of the dots was fascinating for me because the Talent Code itself was really one of the first, I would call them like pop psychology books, where it was like there was things in there that led me into a deep dive into psychology. And Mike and I have studied the same thing at different universities. But this was one of the books that hooked me and dragged me into the deep end. And that was about individual psychology and what happens to help an individual become an extraordinary performer. But then you pivoted from that, or maybe leveled up from that, if you will, from what makes an individual good to what makes a group good. And I'm only going to make the assumption that it happened because you were in there advising teams like, how do you make this guy good? And you spotted some other things that you were like, yeah, but there's other things going on here that are above and beyond individual talent. Is that kind of how that evolved?
Yeah, that is. You go from one mystery to the next. And when you're in certain rooms, and we've all felt it, right? You walk into a school and it feels different in that school, or you walk into a classroom and it feels different in there. Like everybody's on point. Everybody's switched on. Everybody's learning more than in the classroom down the hall or a locker room. You feel it there. Winning locker rooms feel different. What's going on? What is happening there? So that mystery is what led me to start to investigate what's happening in these places that are incredibly tough. If we want to put it in the frame of this conversation, incredibly tough, incredibly resilient, incredibly connected. Where does that behavior come from? Again, it feels like magic, but it's not magic. There's a thing there. And so investigating that thing became what I got into.
Culture, in your eyes, given that you've spent so much time looking at it, what the hell is it?
Yeah, it's a set of relationships working toward a goal. That's what it is.
Okay.
And you got to picture, and you're exactly right that word gets thrown around way too much. It gets thrown around just like, oh, it's this magic dust that certain people have and certain people don't. That's not true. Picture a school of fish moving through a coral reef, or picture a flock of birds in the sky moving through a forest, right? Together. They're connected. They're sharing information. They're watching each other, and they're navigating obstacles in search of a goal. Culture is functionality, right? Culture is performance. Culture is a set of connected people who can do shit together. That's what culture is. And at the end of the day, it's not about how they feel. It's not that it's warm and fuzzy. It's functional. And when you talk to people in great cultures, that's one of the great mistakes that people make when they think about culture. They think, oh, Pixar's great at culture. San Antonio Spurs. Great cultures are where people are happy all the time and where everybody agrees with everybody all the time and where you kind of exist on this higher plane where everything's great. And that's actually not true. And if you think about your own experience, everybody's been a part of a great culture. And maybe it was a team, maybe it was a class, maybe it's family. And what you remember is that feeling of connection, that feeling of energy, that feeling of selflessness, that feeling of being part of something bigger than you. That's that feeling of being in the flock, moving towards together. And it's not warm and fuzzy. It's not like, it can feel warm and fuzzy at times, but ultimately, when you talk to great operators, especially in the military, a lot of people, for instance, will leave the SEAL teams and then they'll come back because they can't get that feeling other places. Or they'll leave a sports team or they'll leave their trading desk on Wall Street and then they'll come back because that's what culture is, right?
Yeah.
Set up relationships moving toward a goal.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that happens in the military. People leave sports teams, they leave great companies, similar effects of, you have that feeling afterwards almost, because it's almost like, all right, we did that work. It was tough. And now I feel good about it, as opposed to feeling good in the moment. I will often say when I might be sitting one-on-one with a coach or a player, the game, like they want to talk about, I want to feel better. I want to feel more confident. This relationship doesn't feel right. And the very throwaway but true line is, the game doesn't give a shit how you feel. But the game's going to go on. The opponent's going to punch you in the face. These things are going to happen. And whether you want them to or not is irrelevant. Whether it feels good or not is irrelevant. It's whether you respond to them and, like you said, navigate through that coral reef or through a sky. That's the thing that makes it magic.
I've heard people also describe culture as solving hard problems with people you admire. Like, that's another way to describe what you're talking about. You're with people you admire and you're solving hard problems together. And that's a feeling you don't get very often in life. It's a great feeling.